Thank you so much, Anne, for that very generous introduction, and thanks to the Presbyterian women for coordinating this event. The lunch, I know, is going to be delicious, and look forward to having this time with you to have some questions and answers and then good conversations around these tables. I'm actually going to call on my great colleague, Yana Huang, to kick things off, and the first part of our time together will be kind of a dialogue between the two of us and all of you.
So I have several questions for you, Henry, and hopefully these are some questions that you all had in your mind as you were hearing about his novel and perhaps reading this novel. The first question is, what inspired you to write City of Peace in this particular genre of murder mystery?
I'll start by saying that this has really been a labor of love now for about 2 years. It has been my hobby, my passion, the thing that I've enjoyed doing when I have been home on my day off, and just letting my imagination kind of take me in a whole new direction. There are 3 things, though, from my life that have really inspired this particular story. And the first of those factors is this church, Fairfax Presbyterian Church. As you all know, we are committed to being a house of prayer for all peoples. And in everything we do in our ministry, we're trying to reach out and make connections with people in this very polarized world around us. And so I've been wondering for years now, how can we do a better job of reaching out as Christians to the Muslims in our community, to the immigrants, to new Americans coming into this world. And it's a challenge. It's an ongoing challenge for us, as I think we all know. But I think it's a very important calling for any Christian community. And my reason for exploring that particular issue and that challenge in this book goes back to the ministry of Jesus. When Jesus did his teaching, did his preaching, more often than not, he told stories. He told parables. He made up accounts that would engage people and challenge people and inspire people. And so that's been my goal as a pastor trying to write a mystery novel. You know, how can I engage people around Christian issues that matter to me, that matter to us, through the form of a parable, a narrative? The second factor that's inspired me is the move that Nancy and I made to the town of Occoquan 3 years ago. As many of you know, we've downsized, selling our Fairfax house after our kids flew the nest, and we bought a condo in Occoquan. And this little town on the banks of the Occoquan River has really become my muse. It has inspired me to imagine, to dream, to think about how people might interact with one another in this little place. It is a town with a fascinating history. Some of the history is explored in the book itself. And then, of course, there's a lot of history I just made up because what the heck, it's a novel. But one of the little tidbits that is not fake news at all is that Occoquan, although it was part of the South, part of Virginia, part of Prince William County, in the middle of the 1800s, even though it was very much a southern town, it was an abolitionist stronghold. The people of Occoquan were very committed to the North and to the abolition of slavery. In fact, in the election of 1860, right before the South split away from the North, Abraham Lincoln ran for president. He received 55 votes from Prince William County. Only 55 votes from the entire county. They all came from Occoquan. The third dimension of my life that has inspired me to write this particular book is based on an experience I had in 1980. I was a student at Duke University. I was encouraged by my roommate to take a summer trip to Israel, which I did, and I engaged on an archaeological dig. and learned at that time about the rich history of the Galilee region. Now, the Galilee, as you know, is where Jesus came from. He grew up in Nazareth. It's the northern part of Israel. And Galilee had a reputation in those days as being a multicultural place. It was called Galilee of the Gentiles. And so that got my imagination going. There's something we can learn from Galilee that's going to help us today in our multicultural environment here. And so I bring some of the stories of Galilee into this book, particularly the stories of a town called Sepphoris. And I won't say any more at this point. I want you to read this book. But Sepphoris was a remarkable town, only 7 miles from Nazareth. It's never mentioned in the New Testament, which is kind of curious, but it was a very important town in this region of Galilee. One other thing before I leave the inspiration part of this talk. When I came back from Israel in 1980, I made a presentation in my home church, showed my slides, not my PowerPoint slides. You remember slides? Those little squares. Showed my slides, and sitting in the front row listening to that presentation was Nancy Freeborn. She was really cute. Still is. And we started dating after that. So that experience not only set me up for my life as a person passionate about religion and eventually becoming a pastor, but it helped me to connect with this woman who became my wife. So all of that is my inspiration.
So, in the fiction, in the novel, the protagonist is Harley Camden, and he is a pastor of this church that you created. So can you tell us a little bit more about Riverside Methodist Church of your book?
There is a church in Occoquan. You can see it if you drive down there. It's right across from Mom's Pie Shop. But it's not Riverside Methodist. I invented Riverside Methodist as being the place where this pastor named Harley Camden is sent. Now, those who read the book will see quickly that he's a Methodist pastor, and you probably wonder, well, why a Methodist? He couldn't be a Presbyterian because we Presbyterians are called to the churches that we serve. Methodists get sent. And it was very important for this novel that this pastor be sent by his bishop to the town of Occoquan. Well, why is he sent there? He's sent there to heal and recover because Harley has just suffered a terrible loss. He has lost his wife and his daughter to a European terrorist attack. And so he is a hurt, grieving, angry man being sent to try to pick up the pieces of his life in Occoquan. So let me just do a brief reading about this place. Riverside Methodist Church in Occoquan had a black Jesus. Harley noticed it the first time he walked into the small sanctuary and looked up at the stained glass window in the front of the church. At first he thought that the glass was simply dirty, but as he moved closer he realized Jesus was designed to look more like a Palestinian Jew than an English Methodist. That's probably historically accurate, he thought, and politically correct. But then he looked closer and saw the date on the lower right-hand corner of the window, 1885. The dark-skinned Jesus had been installed in an era when most stained-glass images of Jesus were decidedly Northern European white. This Jesus had a determined look as he calmed the waters of the Sea of Galilee. Harley quickly realized why. Riverside Methodist had been founded by a pastor named Bailey, a former slave, and for over a century it had been an African-American congregation called Emmanuel Baptist Church. Harley visited the church on his first trip to Occoquan, a small town perched on the southern shore of the Occoquan River. Driving south from Sterling, he took Route 123 through southern Fairfax County and passed the old Lorton Prison, now repurposed as an arts center called the Workhouse. The bishop said she wasn't sending me to prison, he mused as he drove past. But look, there it is. A steep hill, heavily forested on both sides, dropped from the arts center to the Occoquan River. Harley was surprised by the simple beauty of the concrete bridge sweeping over the water into Prince William County, presenting drivers with a panoramic view of the town of Occoquan to the west. He slowed his car as he approached the southern end of the bridge and then turned onto Commerce Street. Welcome to historic Occoquan, founded 1734. Harley had just left the suburban sprawl of 21st century Sterling. He felt like he was entering another world. Creeping west along Commerce Street, he saw Auntie's Pie Shop and Riverside Methodist across the street. He turned on Washington Street and eased his car into the parking lot of the church. Looking around, he saw the river, the bridge, townhouses, and several blocks of shops and restaurants. He could explore the entire town by foot in less than an hour. The bishop had told him that Occoquan was an Indian word meaning at the end of the water. More like at the end of my career, he thought. Looking around the old building and imagining the small congregation that would gather there, he realized that the church was going to be a lot of work. And this realization made him feel frustrated that he had been demoted at the very peak of his career. When he opened the door to his office, which was located next to the pulpit, he was shocked and disappointed. The office was hardly bigger than a broom closet, and the desk had a typewriter on it. Yes, a typewriter in 2017. But Harley was not the only one suffering in Occoquan. That night, Nora Bayati, the daughter of the Iraqi baker, was smothered in her bed.
Ooh. Who did it? So, as you already heard, the plot is driven by murder. And there's an additional to the story of threat of terrorist attack that comes out. And that is not giving anything away. And I'm wondering if you can give a little bit of a teaser, like you did with this second question, to the audience that describes that part of the plot.
Once again, I think the best teaser is going to be a short reading. Harley quickly discovers that Occoquan is a place of real diversity, with immigrants alongside people of different races and nationalities gathering for commerce and life together. And the town has a long history of conflict. I mentioned to you it being an abolitionist stronghold prior to the Civil War. So just a brief reading that sets up the next threat to serenity in the town. Occoquan's rocks were old. On both sides of the river, ancient formations rose above the water and gave silent testimony to the region's history. They formed about 300 million years ago when the North American and African land masses plowed into each other and created a supercontinent called Pangaea. The seam between these continental plates ran along the east coast of North America, with Virginia at the center, and the supercontinent remained stitched together for about 100 million years. Pangaea began to separate about 175 million years ago, creating the continents we know today, but it left behind formations such as the shelves of rock that stood on either side of the Occoquan River. These outcroppings had seen divisions between settlers and Native Americans, colonists and the King of England, the North and the South, blacks and whites, and now Christians and Muslims. Harley saw evidence of this particular division when he was taking a short run on the 4th of July along a 1-mile loop from his townhouse to the River Mill Park, across the pedestrian bridge at the western end of town, through the woods on the other side of the river, and then back to town across the Route 123 bridge on the eastern edge of Occoquan. Directly across the river from his townhouse was an outcropping of rock, hidden by trees along the river, but visible from the road that cut through the woods. These rocks stood as tall and strong as Easter Island heads, as they had for millions of years, but they were covered with graffiti, the work of numerous spray painting vandals. The markings made Harley feel discouraged when he first saw them. But on his morning run, he spotted a new one that stopped him in his tracks and made him shiver. The mark of the Islamic State. Heat and humidity had returned to Occoquan after a few days of cool, dry weather, so Harley was panting and dripping with sweat as he inspected the graffiti. His mind raced with questions. Who are they and how close are they? Right here in Occoquan? What are they planning, and when will they strike? Will it be today, a national holiday? He realized that the symbol on the rock didn't necessarily prove that terrorists were at work. It could have been painted by the same sort of punks that put anarchy symbols on public buildings. Still, the discovery unsettled him, especially on the 4th of July, the day he always felt the most patriotic. And if I could continue to develop this threat just a little bit and what Harley is inspired to do, or at least challenged to do at this point. That very afternoon, the afternoon of the 4th of July, he takes an old friend on a boat ride on the Occoquan River. Her name is Leah Silverman, and she is a Jewish woman that he met on that Duke archaeological dig that he was part of in the year 1985, when the Duke dig was focused on the town, or the city, I should say, the city of Sepphoris in the Galilee. And she challenges him on this boat ride to learn a lesson from Sepphoris. He begins by asking her, has anyone linked the Bayatis, the bakers, to terrorism? Leah's expression made Harley want to take his question back immediately. No, she said sharply. Are you kidding? They've been here for 20 years and are bakers. How does that fit a profile for terrorism? Harley shrugged. He hated to look stupid. There is just so much lone wolf stuff going on, he suggested, trying to redeem himself. Well, not the Bayatis, Leah snapped. Harley, you've got to understand, we Jews have suffered so much from guilt by association. You know the history. Centuries of being called Christ killers. Hitler blaming us for Germany's loss in the First World War. Anytime I see Muslims being associated with terrorism just because they are Muslim, I just have to defend them. Holocausts come out of that kind of suspicion. Harley knew she was right, but he couldn't shake the fear that had grabbed him when he saw the graffiti on the rocks. And he wondered, how can she know for a fact that they are innocent people? Harley, you remember what our prof told us about Sepphoris, right? You've got a role in making Occoquan just such a place. If we can't figure out how to live and work together like the people of Sepphoris, we've got no hope for the future. Any peace on earth has got to start in places like this. Harley sipped his beer and looked at the deep green leaves of the trees on the shoreline. Where was the sweet companionship that they'd enjoyed just a few days before. His rage was returning. Leah was really getting under his skin. Peace on earth? Who is she kidding? How can she be so naive? My wife and daughter believed in peace, and look what happened to them. Harley, you need to be a bridge, she said, just like that bridge over the river. As a pastor, you have the challenge of making connections, bringing people together.
Thank you. Finally, my last question is related to how you were able to weave in all these various important issues and relevant to contemporary time in the novel. So I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about these issues and why you presented them in that manner that you chose.
As I said at the beginning, the issues that have really animated my imagination here are the issues of how to reach across the divisions that are so polarizing today, divisions of race and culture and religion, how to bring together red state America and blue state America, and at a time when people just aren't talking with each other anymore. And part of the inspiration I got came from this town of Sepphoris in the Galilee, where back in the first century, Jews and Romans actually found a way to live together. You'll have to read the book to figure out how they did that. But they did. At a time when Jews were actively revolting against Roman oppression in Sepphoris, they found a way to live together. And one of the possibilities that I believe very strongly is in the possibility of hospitality to bring people together, Christian hospitality in particular. And if I could do one additional reading, it's a reading from a part of the book in which Harley sits down to have dinner at the home of Yusuf and Sophia Ayad, who are Coptic Christians who run a jewelry store in the town of Occoquan. And they're a group that has been in the Middle East since the time of Jesus. They're one of the oldest Christian communities in the world. And currently there's a lot of conflict between Coptics and Muslims in Egypt. There's a lot of oppression of that Coptic community, which is the understanding that Harley brings into his first meeting with them. So they're sitting down for dinner at the Ayad's house, and Harley says to Sophia, "This food is delicious. Thank you very much. It all seems very healthy." "Food is important to us," said Sophia. "Think of the many times that Jesus sat down to eat with people, even tax collectors and sinners. Christian hospitality is very important to Yusuf and to me." "I do appreciate it," Harley added. "Think of how much better the world would be if people actually sat down and ate with each other." "No doubt about it," agreed Yusuf. The Bayadis have become some of our closest friends here in Occoquan, largely because we have shared so many meals. Back in Egypt, Christians and Muslims are getting together less and less, which has caused the animosity and the violence to increase. Did you hear about the attack last December in Cairo? "No, I missed that," admitted Harley. "A suicide bomber attacked St. Mark's Coptic Orthodox Cathedral. More than 24 worshipers were killed, including a 10-year-old girl." "It was horrible," Sophia said, shaking her head. "The worst attack on Copts in years. The Islamic State claimed responsibility." "How did the Copts respond?" asked Harley. "With increased security, of course," said Yusuf, "but also with prayer. Prayers for the victims and for their attackers." Harley was impressed that the Coptic community could respond with prayer for such evildoers. Thinking back over the past year, he hadn't said a single prayer for the terrorists who had killed his wife and daughter. And yet he knew that Jesus commanded his followers to pray for the people who persecuted them. Harley's right that the world would be a better place if people actually sat down and ate with one another. And so one of the promises of this book is that it will teach us how we can do a better job of that ourselves.
Thank you. And at this time, I'm going to go into my response part of this program. And so I want to thank you for giving me the pleasure and opportunity to respond to your first novel. So most of you know I'm a very honest person. And I'm also a very critical person, being an Enneagram 1. So when you asked me to do a book response, I was really worried. One, because I have a hard time reading books and finishing them. I have stacks of books that I start on that I don't get to finish. And they're all excellent books. It's just that I get distracted easily. And especially if the content fails to grab my attention, I just need to be engaged. So I was concerned because, what if it takes me too long to finish the book, right? That was one thing. And then I was concerned because, okay, let's say I finished the book on time. What if I didn't like the book? Mystery is my favorite genre besides theology. So, I'm like, how am I supposed to respond if I don't like the book? I'm going to lose my job. I don't want to hurt your feelings. Well, I am happy to report that I read your novel cover to cover, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I'm not saying that just to keep my job. Because I am happy and relieved that it was as good as it was, and it is. And I did not have to respond with, "Oh, Henry, it's not you, it's me." That would have been my prepared response, but I don't have to use that. So all kiddings aside, you did a beautiful job of writing a heartfelt story. A story of a real substance and importance, especially in our very openly hostile and divisive time in our nation. The book touches upon many interesting topics and issues, as you have mentioned. The fascinating history of Occoquan, along with all the charming characters you expect to find in a small town. A window into an immigrant family system. Frank commentaries on current issues like PTSD, racism, prejudice faced by immigrants and LGBTQ folks, and of course, the issue of spirituality expressed as hospitality in our communities. All my favorite subjects. I know that this book is a murder mystery, and it is, but I felt that at the heart of the book was the gospel of Jesus Christ, without being too preachy. I appreciated getting a glimpse into Harley's internal struggles as he balances the tension of processing his very personal pain in a public manner as the new pastor in town, and as he tries to make sense of the gospel mandate to love your neighbor as yourself, when perhaps what he only wants is justice for the wrong that he had to endure. Harley wants a clear enemy, someone to blame, someone to direct his anger and pain. But instead, what he gets is an opportunity to live out his faith and his call. As a spiritual leader, I confess that I also live in the tension of trying to do my best to obey Jesus' call to follow him, even as a broken, flawed, and wounded person. Yet I don't think you have to be a clergy to see yourself in Harley in this novel, because we all struggle with that tension to varying degrees. As we try our best to follow Jesus, we all struggle. We do our best to reach out and make connections, and it is God who uses those efforts to build bridges. Harley does that. He does what he can in his given context to participate in God's bridge building efforts. Harley's faithfulness to his call as a servant of God, his struggle as a human being doing the best he can in the mess of human relationships. We all know this very well because we all live this every day. Through Harley, we are challenged to once again trust God, to leave behind what we think we know or think we know better than God, to trust in the mystery of God unfolding grace and love through this mystery novel. I hope and pray that all of you reading this novel will hear the call as well. Come, follow me. Follow me into the unknown future, trusting in my power to be present over all situations, so that we all can become building blocks for cities of peace all around us. Congratulations.
Oh.